Now on BBC News, the latest business news from across the globe. World Business Report.
The pace of US job creation eases, suggesting the world's biggest economy is slowing down under pressure from high interest rates. And freshly minted, the BBC gets exclusive access to the first new King Charles banknotes for distribution next year. Hello and welcome to World Business Report. I'm Tadhg Enright. Let's start in the world's biggest economy, that's the United States. The latest data from its Labour Department shows that 236,000 new jobs were created in March, a very healthy figure, but showing a continued decline in the pace of new job creation. This suggests that the economy is slowing down. And the question on everyone's mind is what this data will mean to the US Federal Reserve, its central bank, when it makes its next decision about the interest rate in the United States. Well, let's speak now to our North American business correspondent, Samira Hussein. Thanks for being with us, Samira. You're in New York. This reflects other data that we're hearing from the US, which suggests that perhaps the post-pandemic crunch is coming to an end.
We kind of knew that this was going to be reflected in the March jobs report, a bit of a slowdown in terms of hiring, based on some of the other data that we've been seeing this week. And it falls in line that, yes, we're seeing that the labor market in the United States still remains really healthy. We're still talking about historically low unemployment rate, which sits now at 3.5%. But the pace of job growth for the last 6 months on average has been about 330,000 jobs. This month has been 230, or in March, we see that it's 236,000 jobs. So that is slowing somewhat, but certainly not fast enough for the Federal Reserve that is really trying to slow down the economy.
And the question is whether what we're seeing is back orders from the pandemic being filled, that post-pandemic crunch coming to an end, or is it to do with the fact that higher interest rates are perhaps starting to strangle economic growth to a degree, and what this will mean for the US Federal Reserve in its next big interest rate decision?
Right. So if you look at where a lot of the job growth is happening, we're seeing that a lot of it is coming from jobs from bars and restaurants. You know, we're going into the summer season here, so people are starting to staff up. That said, for those that are watching the Federal Reserve and whether or not they're going to raise interest rates at their next meeting, this, according to, early sort of guesses by economists, they're suggesting that, look, before we got this jobs report, it looked like a 50-50 chance that we were going to see a rate rise. I think the fact that we're still seeing a strong jobs market here in the United States, I think that means that we're probably, the odds of a rate increase have now increased to around 70%.
Okay, Samira Hussein in New York, thank you very much for that. Of course, the reason that we're dealing with historically high interest rates is historically high inflation. And there's good news on the inflation front today, specifically food inflation, an important measure of how food commodities like grains and vegetable oils are priced, fell for the 12th month in a row. The Food Price Index, which is produced by the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, tracks monthly changes in the prices of food commodities, and it fell by 2.1% between February and March. It's now more than 20% lower than its peak that it hit in March of last year. That was after prices soared after Russia invaded Ukraine, because both of them are major food producers, particularly of grains like wheat. So this decline should offer some relief to food processors who turn commodities into food products that we buy in supermarkets, but they also have to deal with other higher prices for energy and labour. That's what they're worried about too. But those falling commodity prices might come as a surprise to many of us trying to budget for the weekly shop. That's, of course, because consumer prices have been continuing to rise rapidly. And in Pakistan, the food inflation situation is particularly ugly. Price rises of 47% year on year and deadly stampedes at free flour distribution centres. That's the reality in Pakistan this Ramadan, as the country continues to battle soaring prices and a collapsing currency. The BBC's Tadhg Asghar meets two families now from different economic backgrounds in Pakistan to see how they're coping.
The kitchen is always busy during iftar time in Ramadan. Asma is trying to make her small budget stretch as far as possible with 3 children to feed.
We cook one time and use that food for the next 2 days. Only my husband earns in our family. Especially in Ramadan, we are unable to buy things. My children ask to eat fruit, but if we buy fruit, then we will not be able to cook dinner.
Her husband Abbas buys the food on his way home from his work at the grain mill.
So basically he's saying that his budget for one day for food is approximately 200 to 300 rupees. And that is almost $1 for food. I mean, he's going to manage his entire meals in $1.
It's a similar story for Hijab. Even though her husband is a sales manager, she asked for a discount for the fruit on sale. But at 800 rupees, nearly $3, it's too much. So she only buys vegetables.
If I recall last year's Ramzan, I used to manage 6 to 7 dishes. But in today's time, I can manage only 3 to 4 items because the prices are increased a lot. The pay is static, but the prices are increasing a lot.
Ramadan is usually a time of celebration, but this year, festivities are muted. The economic crisis is hitting most families hard, with only the very rich spared so far. Tadhg Asghar, BBC News, Lahore.
We're staying with rising food and drink prices. Coffee bean prices on international markets are around 80% higher than they were before the pandemic. This according to the boss of Lavazza, one of the world's biggest coffee companies. Talking to Aaron Heselhurst for this week's Talking Business on BBC News, Antonio Baraveller says he believes there's more inflation to come.
All the industry faces very huge cost increase. And also remembering that a company like us is buying in dollars at the New York stock market. So the ratio between dollar and euro is so important. So we only partially passed the cost increase to consumers. So I would say that at least 50% was absorbed by the company and 50% was, given back to the industry, so to the market. But again, this is up to the fact that we can do it because we are a family company.
And Antonio, you negotiate with all the big retailers around the world. I'm wondering, how difficult have those negotiations been given these surging prices?
So I would say it's a very tough discussion, but probably thanks to our past year's history and the credibility also that we got on the market, we have always been able at the end to find the right solution with them. But not an easy job.
You can see more of that interview with Antonio Baraveller on this week's Talking Business with Aaron Heselhurst on BBC News. It starts at 11:30 this evening in the UK and it's on at other times around the world in the days ahead. In other business today, the IMF's Managing Director, Kristalina Georgieva, has warned that the global economy is facing years of very slow growth. That's ahead of the World Bank and IMF spring meetings next week. She said the world economy would expand at an average annual rate of around 3% over the next 5 years. Airbus has announced it will open a second final assembly line in China that will double its production capacity in the country, with the framework for the deal signed by its CEO in Beijing. Asia's become a key market for both Airbus and its US rival Boeing, as demand for air travel climbs with an expanding middle class. The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is in Turkey for talks. One of the main topics is the future of a deal that allows grain to be exported from Ukrainian ports in the Black Sea. Moscow says the grain deal has been extended as a gesture of goodwill for another 60 days, but Turkey's pushing for a 120-day extension in compliance with the original agreement negotiated by Ankara and the United Nations last July. And Toyota is planning to launch 10 new battery-powered cars over the next 3 years. The world's biggest car maker has been criticised for being too slow to embrace electric vehicles. It and its luxury brand Lexus have just 3 models, selling fewer than 25,000 last year. Well, back here in the UK, millions of new banknotes featuring the image of King Charles are being made, and the BBC has been given exclusive access to the printing process. The portrait is the only change to the existing designs of the Bank of England's £5, £10, £20 and £50 notes, but there's still a year or more before they enter circulation. Here's our cost of living correspondent, Kevin Peachy.
Here's your change. A new monarch means a new portrait on new banknotes. On this day alone, 6 million tenors carrying the image of King Charles are being printed for the Bank of England in this highly secure site. They're ready to begin replacing nearly 5 billion notes out there featuring the Queen, but only as the older ones become worn or damaged. Up until now, she's been the one and only monarch shown on the bank's circulating note.
Portrait of Her Majesty the Queen.
Currency which will still be accepted in the shops. The King is already on 50p coins, but the monarch doesn't appear on banknotes issued by banks in Scotland and Northern Ireland. And these look, but aren't quite ready to go out.
You may not be lucky enough to have a wad of cash like this, that's £50,000. But even to just get one of these notes, you're going to have to wait until the middle of next year when the King Charles notes enter circulation.
The bank's chief cashier, whose signature is on these notes, says there's plenty to prepare in the next 12 months.
There's a huge amount that has to happen just to make sure that people can use their banknotes. There are thousands of machines up and down the country that take banknotes, things like self-service checkouts in supermarkets, and they all have to be updated to recognise the new designs.
But do we still use cash to pay? Where better to judge than at the King's Head, a site with its own rich history said to have once hosted James II.
But I think we noticed the biggest change during COVID, when people didn't want to be touching cash and they just started using their phones more, their watches, their credit cards.
How did you pay?
Did you use these?
This is this.
It's so much faster, it's a lot easier, a lot quicker, and you keep control. So yeah, I think, you know, as a dinosaur, we've moved on and evolved, and you go, that's the future, isn't it?
Is there anything you use cash for these days?
Parking, you know, the pound, meters, that is literally it, and car washes, that is literally it.
So cash may no longer be king, but in time, and for some time to come, kings will be on our cash. Kevin Peachy, BBC News.
You can stay in touch with the @BBC Business team and me on social media. I'm @Tadhg Enright. That's World Business Report until Monday. Until then, have a lovely weekend. Bye-bye.
I think we can use a form of capitalism and continue to get its benefits while solving climate change.
We should remember that the globalization we had before brought more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
I don't wake up thinking, I'm here to change the world, but I wake up thinking maybe I can make the world a better place.
Women ourselves are finding our power. We always had a voice. We just weren't allowed to use it.
I think that's the strength of Georgia, and that's the resilience of Georgia, to be able to continue on its path towards Europe, towards NATO.
When big names talk, they talk to the BBC.
On top of this kind of rubble, rescuers are using their bare hands.
them throwing down blocks and trying to search desperately for survivors.
Small arms fire as well as heavy artillery fire, which means that the Russian lines are very close.
This is as close as we've been able to get today to the explosion. It happened inside the police compound just behind me.
This is a bus that's carrying some of the people that were detained following the riot.
These were people's homes. They were newly built. But look at it now. 80% of this village is gone.
We break